up, everyone? In this video we are going to look at global warfare case studies, and this time we're looking, of course, at midpoints, orbs, nodes, and the invisible planets mundane chart analysis. 2 20th century case studies read through hard aspect midpoint structures, orb discipline, the lunar nodal axes, and the historical, hypothetical, and invisible planets, with technical appendices, a worked orb table, and the diary correspondence of an inventive faculty of astronomers and astrologers. This is a creative, interpretive work of mundane astrology. It does not claim astrology causally explains war. It applies documented astrological technique to documented historical dates, and presents the interpretive layer as symbolic reading, clearly labeled throughout. We're going to look at this table of sections and basically go through what we're going to talk about. And really quick, before we get started with this video, please subscribe, like, comment, share if you did, and create peace and love. And with the help of Report Labs, we're bringing you this PDF file. So the preface here, we're looking at method, evidentiary posture, and what the compendium does and does not claim. Case study 1 is going to be the July crises, 1914, midpoint structures and orb discipline in the outbreak of the First World War. Second case study is the September crises, 1939. We're looking at the nodal axes and hypothetical planet context in the outbreak of the Second World War. Appendix A is going to be orb theory and mundane work, a worked orb, allowance table across aspect classes and body types. Appendix B is going to be the invisible and hypothetical planets, Vulcan, Trans-Pluto, and the Hamburg-Uranian bodies, history and technique. Appendix C is going to be the lunar nodes and collective charts, Rahu Ketu, draconic overlays, and eclipse point reasoning. Faculty diary, the Meridian Institute correspondence, invented diary memoranda on the 2 case studies, and a glossary for technical terms used throughout. So beginning with the preface here, which is method and evidentiary posture. So this compendium applies mundane astrological technique, midpoint structures, orb-weighted aspect analysis, the lunar nodal axes, and the historical roster of hypothetical and invisible planets to 2 documented dates: the outbreak of general war in Europe in late July and early August of 1914, and the German invasion of Poland on September 1st, 1939. The dates, treaty obligations, and sequence of declarations are historical fact. The astrological reading built on top of them is presented as symbolic interpretation within a specific technical tradition, not as a claim that any configuration caused, predicted, or explains why these wars happened. Alright, so we left off right here. Basically, we're going to look at these 2 technical honesty notes, bear stating up front, because they apply to every chart in this book. First, orb discipline matters more in mundane work than almost anywhere else in the field, because a chart with 10 or more bodies, plus several hypothetical points, will produce apparent hits, almost by construction if orbs are left loose. Every configuration below is reported with its orb, and Appendix A sets out the allowances used consistently across both case studies. And second is the hypothetical and invisible planets discussed here: Vulcan, Trans-Pluto, the 8 Hamburg-Uranian bodies, Cupido, Hades, Zeus, Kronos, Apollon, Admetos, Vulcanus, Poseidon, are not confirmed astronomical objects. Their positions are calculated from published hypothetical ephemerides used within specific 20th century astrological schools. Appendix B gives the history of each in full, including the astronomical record of why most were abandoned. First, we're looking at the July crisis, 1914, midpoint structures and orb discipline in the outbreak of the First World War. A single midpoint does not declare a war. A tight, repeated structure across 5 charts might be worth a second look. So we look at the chart set. 4 charts anchor this case study. The Austro-Hungarian ultimatum to Serbia, which occurred July 23rd, 1914 in Vienna. The Austro-Hungarian Declaration of War on Serbia, July 28th. The German Declaration of War on Russia, August 1st. And the British Declaration of War on Germany, August 4th, London. The hour Britain's ultimatum expired, which is 2300 local. Rectified event charts of this kind carry real uncertainty. Minute level timing for declaration is rarely preserved with astronomical precision, so every angle reported below should be read as illustrative to within roughly half a degree, not exact. The recurring structure. Across 3 of the 4 charts, a Mars-Saturn midpoint sits within an orb of the Sun in the Vienna ultimatum chart. The Sun falls at approximately 0 degrees 12 from the Mars-Saturn midpoint. In the German declaration chart, roughly 0 degrees 47. Under Hamburg School Convention, this reads as Sun equals Mars-Saturn, identity and national will Sun, fused with aggression, restriction axis, Mars-Saturn. Conventionally read as a signature of forced constrained action rather than free initiative. This is presented with the caution the preface already stated. A recurring midpoint across 4 charts, drawn 8 days apart, during a single unfolding diplomatic crisis is not statistically remarkable on its own. The same actors, treaties, and mobilization clocks are driving the dates in the first place. The reading is offered as a worked example of technique, not as evidence the technique predicts crises. And also, this is going to be a pretty long video because we have about 23 more pages to look into, so really quick. So here is the German Declaration of War on Russia, specifically for August 1st, 1914. And we can clearly see these are illustrative rectified placements for the August 1st, 1914 declaration, showing the Sun sitting near the Mars-Saturn midpoint, which is the red line, and positions are approximate. So we see here that aspect, Mars-Saturn midpoint, in between Gemini and Cancer, with Saturn in Taurus, Mars in Cancer, Sun in Leo. The node in between Libra and Virgo, we see Uranus in Aries, which is also very important, and we're going to get into these. So that tells us that these signs are very important: Libra, Leo, Cancer, Gemini, Taurus, and Aries for this chart. So here's where the structure breaks down. The 4th chart, Britain's declaration, August 4th, does not repeat the pattern. Sun there sits closer to 8 degrees from the same midpoint. Outside any orb, this compendium treats as meaningful. A reading that only reports the hits and quietly drops the misses, doing exactly the orb fitting the field, is most often fairly accused of. The honest version of this case study reports the miss alongside the 3 hits. Sun, Mars, Saturn structure across the 4 July crisis charts reported with the miss included. This is a orb-weighted summary table. And we'll see the chart, configuration, orb, and is it tight. So we'll notice that for the Vienna ultimatum chart, July 23rd, the configuration is Sun equals Mars, Saturn with an orb of 0 degrees 41, and it is. AH declares on Serbia, July 28th, Sun equals Mars, Saturn again. This time the orb is 1 degree 05, it's marginal. We notice that Germany declares on Russia, August 1st, Sun equals Mars, Saturn. This time the orb is 0 degrees 47, yes. And Britain declares on Germany, August 4th, Sun equals Mars, Saturn. Orb is 8 degrees 02, so no. In the notes here, we see dates and the sequence of declarations follow the standard diplomatic history chronology of the July crisis. See, for example, Christopher Clark, The Sleepwalkers, How Europe Went to War in 1914-2012, The Sun equals Mars Saturn midpoint structure and its conventional cosmobiology reading, forced or constrained action, often under external pressure. It follows Reinhold Lieberton, The Combination of Stellar Influences, Part 3. The general critique of astrological pattern claims relying on selective reporting of hits is discussed in Jeffrey Dean and Ivan Kelly. Is astrology relevant to consciousness and psyche? Journal of Consciousness Studies, 10. Here is the case study for the September crises, 1939, nodal axes and hypothetical planet contacts in the outbreak of the Second World War. The node is not a body, it is a place where two paths are already going across. So here is the anchor chart. Primary chart of this German invasion of Poland, September 1st, 1939 at 4:45 local time, the conventionally cited hour of the first engagement at Westerplatte. The lunar north node Rahu that morning sits in early Taurus, while Mars sits within roughly 4 degrees of that node. On the same side of the axis, conventionally read in the nodal technique set out in Appendix C, has martial action occurring on the collectively activated Rahu side of the axis, rather than the depending or unresolved, depleting or unresolved south node side, which is K2. So here's how we read the axes. The lunar nodes mark the moon's path crossing the ecliptic, so that's eclipse points, not planets. In mundane work, the axis is read as a collective fault line. Bodies near Rahu are read as amplified and faded when near Ketu as depleting as unresolved. This is traditional symbolic reading, not a physical claim about the node's gravity. Nodal axes for September 1st, 1939 chart illustrative. We see Mars sits roughly 4 degrees from Rahu on the activated side of the eclipse axis. And here is the hypothetical planet layer. Because this case study is also the compendium's worked example for the invisible hypothetical bodies, full history in Appendix B, the chart is additionally read against the 8 Hamburg school points. 2 contacts are reported. Kronos, the Uranian point associated with authority, command, and the state, conjunct the midheaven within roughly 1 degree. And Admetos, associated with rigid, grinding, prolonged process, square Mars within roughly 1.5 degrees. Given the compendium's own orb standard for the hypothetical planet contacts, Appendix A, 1 degree is conservative. The Admetos square sits right at the edge of what this book treats as meaningful. It is reported, not asserted. It is worth being direct about the epistemic status of this layer. Kronos and Admetos are not confirmed astronomical bodies. Any reading built on their positions inherits whatever uncertainty attaches to the hypothetical ephemeris itself. On top of the ordinary interpretive uncertainty, every mundane reading carries. Appendix B lays out that history in full, rather than asserting these points as established. So here's the status key. A solid orbit equals astronomically confirmed. A dashed orbit equals hypothetical unconfirmed. Used symbolically only. So confirmed bodies, solid orbits, versus the historical hypothetical points, Vulcan and Trans-Pluto, dashed unconfirmed. Schematic, not to scale. We also see Vulcan, proposed in 1859 to explain Mercury's perihelion precession, explained instead by general relativity, 1915, never observed. Trans-Pluto Isis, proposed by some mid-20th century astrologers, no such body has been astronomically found. So we see hypothetically Trans-Pluto right here on the outskirts. And then we're getting inner and we see Mars. We begin to see Earth, the observer. We see Venus on the inside of the Earth. And inside, right up to closer to the Sun, we see Mercury. And then we see very close to the Sun, Vulcan, hypothetically, with the Sun right there. So comparing the 2 case studies, step beside case study 1, the technical contrast, is useful in its own right. 1914 was read primarily through a repeated midpoint structure across several charts. 1939 is read through a single chart's nodal axes and hypothetical point contacts. Different techniques applied to different kinds of historical question, a slow-building multi-party crisis versus a single decisive act, is arguably a more defensible use of the toolkit than forcing one method onto both. Here is a schematic for 20th century mundane timeline, placing both outbreak dates against the Saturn-Neptune 1917 and Uranus-Pluto early 1930s, long cycle background discussed in Appendix C. It's a mundane timeline schematic for 20th century. We see from 1900 all the way until 1945. Beginning at 1915, we see the first WW1 outbreak, July 1914, and then Saturn-Neptune conjunction in 1917. We see the Uranus-Pluto square, 1932 through 34, exact phase during the Second World War outbreak, September of 1939. And here are the notes. The 4:45 timing for the opening bombardment at Westerplatte is the widely cited hour in standard accounts of the invasion's outbreak. See, for example, Richard Overy, Blood and Ruins, The Great Imperial War. Kronos and Admetos are two of the 8 hypothetical trans-Neptunian points introduced by Alfred Wheat and Friedrich Siegren of the Hamburg School, the early 20th century. Their symbolic associations, Kronos, authority, the state, Admetos, rigid or prolonged process, follow the conventional Uranian astrology literature. For example, Ludwig Rudolph, Hamburg School textbook. Here is Appendix A, orb theory and mundane work. A worked orb allowance table across aspect classes and body types. Orb has a tolerance in degrees within which an aspect is still counted as active. Wider orbs make a chart's symbolism richer and its claims weaker. Tighter orbs make the reverse trade. Mundane work with large body counts and in this compendium, hypothetical points layered on top, is the branch of the field where sloppy orb practice does the most damage to a reading's credibility, because it is also the branch with the most points available to find a hidden. Here we see orb allowances used consistently across both case studies in this compendium by aspect class and body type. 0 degrees at the bottom, 2 degrees, 4 degrees, 6 degrees, 8 degrees, all the way to 10. And we see here on top, conjunction, opposition with the luminaries is all the way at 10.0 degrees. Conjunction, opposition with the planets at a solid 8.0 degrees. Square trine with the luminaries, 7.5 degrees. Square trine with the planets, 6.0 degrees. Sextile, 4.0 degrees. Minor aspect, semi-square, sesquiquadrate, 2.0 degrees. Uranian midpoint hard aspects, 1.5 degrees. And hypothetical planet contacts, conservative use, 1.0 degrees. So these allowances are broadly consistent with mainstream 20th century practice: wider orbs for luminaries and major aspects, progressively tighter for minor aspects, midpoint contacts, and hypothetical points. Though individual schools vary by degree or more in either direction, and no orb standard has an independent empirical justification beyond practitioner convention. Orb conventions of this general shape, wider for sun, moon, and major aspects, tighter for minor aspects and midpoints, are documented across mainstream 20th century technical manuals. For example, Eberton for midpoint orbs and standard natal astrology reference works for major minor aspect orbs. There is no independent astronomical or statistical derivation for any specific value. Alright, now let's look at Appendix B, which is the invisible and hypothetical planets Vulcan, Trans-Pluto, Hamburg, Uranian bodies, history, and technique. Astrology's hypothetical bodies fall into very different categories, and this compendium is careful to keep them separate. So we see astronomically proposed, later disconfirmed. So Vulcan was proposed by the astronomer Urbain Le Verrier in 1859 to explain an anomaly in Mercury's orbital precession on the model of his earlier successful prediction of Neptune. No such planet was ever observed. The anomaly was fully explained in 1915 by Einstein's general theory of relativity without requiring an additional body. A minority of astrologers nonetheless continued to calculate a symbolic Vulcan position from proposed orbital elements, treating it as a point of concentrated, hidden intensity close to the Sun. Trans-Pluto, sometimes called Isis, was proposed by a handful of mid-20th century astrologers on the model of the real search for Pluto as a further body beyond it. No astronomical search has ever confirmed such an object, and modern outer solar system surveys have found no undiscovered planet at the proposed distance and brightness. Never astronomically proposed, symbolic constructs from the start. The 8 Hamburg school Uranian points, Cupido, Hades, Zeus, Kronos, Apollon, Admetos, Vulcanus, and Poseidon, were introduced by Alfred White and Friedrich Segren in Germany in the early 20th century as calculated points with assigned symbolic meanings. Cupido, association, family groupings; Hades, decay, the discarded; Zeus, directed force, engines; Kronos, authority, the state; Apollon, expansion, trade, science; Admetos, rigidity, grinding process; Vulcanus, concentrated power; Poseidon, idea, spirit revelation. These were never proposed as astronomical hypotheses to be tested. They are explicitly stipulated symbolic points, and Waite School treated their arithmetic construction, not their physical existence, as the basis of the technique. This compendium's use of Kronos and Admetos in case study 2 falls in the second category. They are used as the Hamburg School's own practitioners would use them, as calculated symbolic points within a specific named technical system, with no astronomical claim attached. Leverrier's 1859 Vulcan hypothesis and its 1915 resolution by general relativity are standard history of astronomy material. The hunt for Vulcan, Hamburg School's 8 hypothetical points and the conventional meanings are documented in Waite's in Segren's Regal Work for Planetan Builder, Rules for Planetary Pictures, subsequent Uranian astrology literature such as Rudolph's Hamburg School textbook. Lunar note in collective charts. So Rahu Ketu, draconic overlays, and eclipse point reasoning. The lunar nodes are the 2 points where the moon's orbital plane crosses the ecliptic. They are geometric intersections, not bodies, and they are where eclipses become possible. In Vedic technique, they are named Rahu, north node, and Ketu, south node, and are treated as full participants in the chart with their own dignities and dasha periods, despite having no physical mass. In Western mundane technique, the axis is more often read structurally. Which side of the axis of war chart's Mars or Sun falls on is treated as a marker of whether the collective action is forward activating or depleting karmic. A reading with a long history in the tradition, but no independent physical grounding, since the nodes exert no gravitational influence of their own. A related technique, the draconic chart, recasts the entire chart with the north node fixed at 0 degrees Aries, effectively using the nodal axis itself as the chart's reference frame, rather than the equinox or fixed star. A third zodiac frame alongside the tropical and sidereal frames discussed elsewhere in the series. So Rahu and Ketu's treatment as shadow planets, Shayagraha, with full dignities in their own Vimshatari dasha periods, is standard classical Vedic doctrine. For example, Parashara's Brihat Parashara or Ashashara. The draconic zodiac, which sets the north node to 0 degrees Aries as its reference point, is a documented technique in Western astrology, most associated in the modern literature with the work of Pamela A.F. Crane and others from the 1970s onward. Here is a faculty correspondence, Meridian Institute diary, invented diary memoranda on the 2 case studies, 1936 through 1947. The Meridian Institute for Historical and Mundane Astrology and every member of its faculty, quoted below, is an invention created for this compendium. The diary format is used to dramatize genuine methodological disagreements about rectification or discipline in the hypothetical planets in a livelier register than the appendices allow. To all faculty mundane section, from Dr. A. Kessler-Voss Chair, response to standing or policy for the 1914-1939 case files, and the date, hypothetically here, is March 14th, 1936. Effective this term, no case file leaves this building, citing a hypothetical point contact wider than 1 degree. I do not care how well it reads for the theses. Kronos on an angle at 1.5 degrees is not a finding, it is a hope. So here we see. Okay, so I forgot to continue recording this video, meaning I got distracted, but I'm back to complete it. So we're on the faculty correspondence, the Meridian Institute diary. And first we noticed that September 11th, 1938, Okafor, private diary. They spent the morning at re-rectifying the Vienna ultimatum chart for the third time. Baldassar insists the Mars-Saturn midpoint holds at any reasonable Earth time uncertainty. I am less sure and told him so over lunch, rather more sharply than I intended. He took it well, which somehow made it worse. If the structure survives a half-degree shift in either direction, I will concede the point in writing, not before. September 1939, Visconti, private diary. Some news from Poland yesterday. Before I had properly finished reading the paper, I had already pulled the ephemeris for 4:45, which I am not proud of and which I mention only because Adrian will ask correctly why a case file on a war that began the day before yesterday already has a node chart attached to it. The honest answer is that the habit of mind this institute trains into a person does not switch off simply because the news is real this time. In January 30th, 1947, Institute minutes recorded by I. Okafor. So, motion carried 6-1, Conte dissenting. The 1914 and 1939 case files will be published together with the 4 of August 1949 misleft in the table rather than quietly dropped. Over the objection that it weakens the chapter, the chair's ruling entered into the minutes at a request. A weakened chapter that is still true is worth more to this institute than a strong one that it required us to hide a row of a table. We are not in the business of chapters that only work if no one checks them. Here is a reference glossary. Pretty much a lot of what we went over. Everything. Draconic chart. Chart recast with Rahu fixed at 0 degrees Aries, using the nodal axis itself as a reference frame. Hamburg School, Iranian astrology, German technical tradition, built on 8 calculated hypothetical points and systematic midpoint analysis via the 90-degree style. Hypothetical planet, calculated point treated symbolically within a name, technical system, without an accompanying claim that it is a confirmed astronomical body. Midpoint, the arithmetic mid-longitude between two bodies. A third body occupying that point is read as fusing both symbolisms. Mundane astrology, the branch of astrology concerned with nations, collectives, and historical events rather than individuals. Nodal axis, the line connecting the 2 points where the moon's orbital plane crosses the ecliptic Rahu and Ketu mark where eclipses can occur. Orb, the degree tolerance within which an aspect or midpoint contact is still counted as active. Rectification, the process of estimating or adjusting an event's chart time when the exact recorded time is uncertain or unavailable. Vulcan, a planet proposed in 1859 to explain an anomaly in Mercury's orbit never observed, and the anomaly was fully explained by general relativity in 1915. So, the Meridian Institute's faculty and all diary correspondences, hence compendium of original inventions, historical dates, documented astrological technique, and the astronomical history of Vulcan, and related hypotheses are cited in the numbered notes. Illustrative chart placements are rectified, approximate, and are not offered as precision ephemeris data or as a causal explanation of either war. Alright, and here we are going to I actually just made the same PDF in one. That's crazy. Alright, well, thank you guys for watching this video with peace and love. I'll see you in the next one. Piscean out.